What if the toughest cowboy on your TV once lay on a hospital table with no heartbeat and came back? Before Clint Walker became Cheyenne Bodie, he was a riverboat hand, a Las Vegas doorman, and a young man so imposing that a Hollywood power broker tried to rename him Jett Norman. He battled studio brass at the height of his fame, carried private grief few ever saw, and survived a freak accident that should have ended everything. If you watched Cheyenne after supper with the family, black and white glow filling the living room, this one's for US. Tonight, we're not retelling headlines. We're opening the drawers he kept closed. The contract war that nearly cost him his breakthrough. The quiet heartbreaks at home. The disciplined life he built after staring down the edge. Stay with me to the end. There's a late-in-life family detail that reframes the cowboy you thought you knew. But Clint's story doesn't start with studio lights. It starts with a twin boy in Illinois who couldn't stay poutine and whose first big journey put him on the water long before the saddle. Roots, restlessness, and the first uniform. He came into the world as a twin in 1927 Illinois. Farm country values, big sky, bigger chores. School never fit his shoulders. He walked out early and walked straight into real work. Factory shifts, then riverboat pay that smelled like diesel and muddy water. If you remember the last years of the war, you know the feeling. Young men in a hurry. At 17, he signed on with the Merchant Marine, learning grit the hard way. Long watches, rough seas, and no applause at the end of a shift. Peace didn't slow him down. Texas for a spell, Long Beach for another, then Las Vegas, long before the neon got loud, where a towering kid with polite manners opened doors at the sands. He was the kind of fellow people noticed without him saying a word. When Korea flared, he put the uniform back on with the Merchant Marine and did his part, then drifted home again to the only thing he knew, work. What never changed was the engine inside him. No complaining, no shortcuts, no poor me. That quiet drive, many of you lived it too, would be the thing that carried him when fame came calling. And it did, in the most unlikely way. A roadside favor, a powerful name, and a decision that would try to rename a man who already knew who he was. The door swings open, and a new name. Las Vegas gave him tips and calluses, and one introduction that changed everything. Word moved fast about the polite giant at the sands. A talent man with sharp eyes and sharper instincts sized him up and said the line only old Hollywood could deliver. Kid, we can make something of you. Papers were signed, Polaroids were taken, and then came the part that always makes folks our age smile. They tried to rename him, Jett Norman. It sounded chrome-plated and fast, but it wasn't him. The man who'd hauled river ropes and stood midnight watch didn't need polishing to look like a star. Screen tests followed, awkward at first, then easy, once he learned to let silence do the talking. The camera loved the stillness, the way he filled a doorway without trying. And when the Cheyenne script landed on a desk with his photo clipped to the corner, the match was obvious. In 1955, Clint Walker, under his own name, rode into living rooms as Cheyenne Bodie, that tall, decent stranger who settled trouble and rode on. If you were there, you remember, weeknights had a rhythm and this show fit right into it. Fame came quick, and so did the first hard lesson. Studios in those days liked their cowboys, grateful and underpaid. Clint wasn't loud about it, but he was firm. Fair pay, fair terms. At the height of the show's popularity, he did something most young stars wouldn't dare. He walked. The suits tried to bluff, tried to plug the hole with another hat and horse, and audiences could tell. Eventually, the deal got fixed, and Clint rode back in like he'd never left. That quiet backbone, many of you lived that in your own careers, kept him from being chewed up by a machine that didn't always play nice. He'd won the fight. But the cost of standing tall has a way of coming due later, far from the glow of the studio lights, high noon with Hollywood, and the price of being tall. Winning a contract fight is one thing. Outgrowing a costume is another. After Cheyenne, the studios tried him in every saddle they had. Fort Dobbs, Yellowstone Kelly, a string of rugged pictures where the landscape did half the talking and Clint did the rest. He could fill a frame like an oak tree, steady, unshowy, and somehow reassuring. But he wasn't just brawn. He slipped into a light touch in Send Me No Flowers. And then surprised even the folks who thought they knew him when Frank Sinatra tapped him for None But the Brave. Different gear, same quiet gravity. The real turning point came when he joined that rowdy platoon in the Dirty Dozen. If you saw it at a drive-in or a downtown matinee, you remember the shock of it. Clint as the gentle giant who could break a man or a heart with the same hands. It told Hollywood he could carry more than a 6-gun, yet the business kept tugging his sleeve. Back to the West, kid. So he faced down a grizzly on one poster, trekked through India and Maya on another, and kept proving he was more than the hat they wanted him to wear. What never left him was the work ethic you and I recognize. Show up early, hit your mark, let the bragging be someone else's problem. He signed on for TV movies, pilots, even the odd comedy, because a craftsman keeps swinging the hammer, not waiting for applause. The fame was comfortable enough, the typecasting less so. Still, he made his peace with it. Strong stories, honest pay, and a fan base that stayed with him long after the Nielsen boxes moved on. And then, just when the career finally felt balanced, one winter afternoon reminded him, and the rest of us, how fast everything can change. The day the heart stopped. May of 1971, Mammoth Mountain. Late snow, good light, and a man who'd spent his life sure-footed on any trail. One bad turn, one violent tumble, and a ski pole punched into Clint Walker's chest, nicking the very engine that kept him upright. The ride down wasn't in a chairlift. It was in a rush to an operating room where, for a terrible stretch, the monitors said there was no more Clint to save. Older folks like us know this part too well. Sometimes it takes one steady professional who refuses to give up. A doctor looked twice, found the faintest sign, and the team went to work. They repaired what could be repaired and handed him back to the world. In plain talk, he was gone, and then he wasn't. What happened next is the measure of the man. He didn't turn his escape into a stunt or a headline. He treated it like a second chance. He walked, he breathed, he rebuilt. Within weeks, he was back on set. Not to prove he was invincible, but because that's what craftsmen do. Show up, do the job, no self-pity. If you've ever come back from a close call, you know the small changes it carves into a person. A little more gratitude, a little less noise, a sharper eye for what matters. The legend of Cheyenne Bodie was big. The heart of Clint Walker was bigger. Surviving the mountain was a miracle. Living with what it taught him. That was the real work. And the quiet costs of that lesson, they showed up far from the cameras, in a home life that knew both comfort and heartbreak, love, loss, and the quiet house after the crowd. Fame filled the mailbox. It didn't always fill the kitchen. Clint tried marriage the old-fashioned way. Long haul, not headline. He wed young, raised one daughter, and did his best to be present between call times and location shoots. Many of you know that rhythm. Race to work, race home, hope the people you love still feel you there. By the late 60s, that first marriage had worn thin. No scandals, no shouting, just two good people who couldn't keep step anymore. He found love again and built a steadier middle chapter. Then life did what life sometimes does in the quiet hours. It took someone dear without asking permission. The second loss hit hard and lingered. Add to that the kind of grief only a twin can understand. When you're born side by side, any goodbye feels like half a life dimming. Clint wasn't one for speeches about sorrow. He carried it politely, the way men of his generation often did. Hold the door, hold your tongue, hold your family together. After the mountain accident, he tightened his routine. Simple food, early mornings, the kind of clean living our doctors kept preaching long before we listened. He talked more with fans, less with reporters. He bragged on his daughter's milestones and kept the rest in the family circle. And in time, he did what so many of us do after a storm. He remarried, chose peace over noise, and made the most of the ordinary days, the best kind there are. Those choices didn't put him back on every billboard, but they gave him something rarer, steadiness. And even with the hearth burning warm, the craftsman in him still wanted one more project, one more story. proof that the cowboy had more to give than a saddle and a squint. One more trail, this time on paper. When the lights cooled and the call sheets got thinner, some men turned bitter. Clint reached for a different kind of saddle, a story. A mutual friend in the Western family introduced him to a younger novelist, and the two of them did what cowboys and craftsmen do best. They worked, page by page, over months, then years. They hammered out a frontier tale the old way. No shortcuts, no cheap tricks, just grit, honor, and the slow burn of a man up against bad odds. They called it a Western because that's where it lived, but really it was a Clint Walker story. Quiet strength, hard choices, and a sunrise worth earning. Some of you met him in those years on the circuit. Small-town festivals, museum fundraisers, Western heritage weekends. He'd sign a dog-eared VHS sleeve, shake your hand like a neighbor, and ask about your grandkids. No entourage. No, I used to be. The novel gave him a fresh reason to talk with folks who'd grown up watching him, and a way to say, without speeches, that the fire was still there. Recognition found him too, the kind that means more, with a little gray at the temples, a star on the sidewalk, boots and spurs honors from the Western community, handshakes from peers who knew what it took to stay standing. None of it changed his routine. Early mornings, simple meals, a walk, a book, a letter answered by hand. The big rides were behind him, but he wasn't done traveling. The last stretch of Clint's trail would be steady, grateful, and, when the time came, quiet. The last quiet ride, and what the family finally said out loud. The spotlight dimmed gently for Clint. No scandal exit, no tour of farewell talk shows. Just smaller parts, a voice gig or two, and the kind of weekends many of us prefer as we get older. A good book, a quiet porch, a handshake at a Western festival, where the stories are warmer than the coffee. When the time came in 2018, it was the kind of goodbye most families hope for. Peaceful, dignified, with people who loved him, close enough to hear the breathing, slow. Only later did the circle around him start telling the little truths that never make headlines, but tell you everything. They talked about the man who answered fan mail in his own neat hand, about the simple meals and the long walks, more about gratitude than fitness, about the way he kept a toolbox by the back door and would fix a hinge for a neighbor without a word. They said the near death on the mountain didn't turn him into a preacher or a showman. It made him quieter, kinder, more present at the table. The cowboy who settled trouble on TV spent his last years settling small troubles for real people, one favor at a time. For those of us who watched Cheyenne with our parents and then our kids, that's the detail that reframes him. The hero didn't disappear when the cameras did. He just moved into a smaller frame, home, friends, the little civic kindnesses that keep a town stitched together. Awards look fine on a shelf, but the thing he seemed proudest of was simpler, that he'd lived long enough and carefully enough to come back from the edge and be useful. He left us with that model, not a myth, a map. And there's one last turn on it, how to carry a legacy without making a fuss, what the cowboy leaves behind. Strip away the posters and the theme songs, and you're left with a simple, sturdy truth. Clint Walker earned his legend the old way. A twin boy from Illinois who worked with his hands, stood up to a studio when it mattered, kept his head when fame ran hot, and, when the mountain tried to take him, came back kinder and quieter, not louder. He wasn't perfect, he was steady. In our book, that counts for more. For those of us who watched Cheyenne with family clustered around one small screen, his story feels like a mirror. Hard work, private grief, second chances, and the quiet satisfaction of being useful. That near miss in 71 didn't turn him into a headline machine. It turned him into the neighbor who fixes the hinge, answers the letter, shows up on time, and goes home to supper. I'll leave you with this. Which chapter surprised you most? The contract standoff he actually won, the heartbeat that went missing and came back, or the way he chose small kindnesses over big speeches? Tell me below. And if Clint Walker still rides through your memories, favorite Cheyenne episode, a movie that stuck with you, share that too. If this walk down the trail felt like good company, tap like, pass it to an old friend who watched with you back then, and stick around. We've got more true Hollywood stories to tell, the kind you can feel from the back row. If this brought back good memories, please like and subscribe. Till then, take good care of yourself.